Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hyperspace on Dark Matter Radio Network. I'm your host, Solaris BlueRaven, and I want to thank everybody for tuning in this evening, and a special thank you to webmaster and producer Keith Rowland. And my special guest this evening is David Sereda. David is co-founder of Voice Entertainment, director, producer, filmmaker, photographer, author, and public speaker. He is also a well-known space scientist, physicist, ecologist, and spiritual explorer. He has planted over 1.3 million trees in Canada, spoke in Congress for clean fusion power in 1993, marketed sustainable housing, breakthroughs in oil spill cleanup, solar, wind, and hydrogen technology. He has appeared on hundreds of radio shows such as Art Bell's George Noory, and Punnett on Coast to Coast AM, If It Rocks with Allan Handelman, Whitley Strieber's Dreamland, and worldwide on many TV shows such as CNN, Anderson Cooper, Fox News, Fox and Friends, ABC Peter Jennings, History Channel, TLC, and the Sci-Fi Channel. David has studied Christian mysticism, Buddhism, Hinduism, yoga, Judaism, Islam, Sufism, Pythagoras for over 30 years. His practice and direct experience in the meditation started with Hinduism yoga, Buddhism vipassana, rebirthing, Osho's dynamic chakra breathing, mandala, Nada Brahma, Kundalini, chanting mantras, Christian meditation, and prayer. He has met and studied with many meditation masters from Far East, as well as Wallace Black Elk and many other Native American Indian teachers. His goal is to inspire and teach other people how they can have their own mystical religious experiences and how they can use meditation and prayer to heal any mental challenges or personal struggles they might be experiencing. And his websites are www.lightstreamtechnologies.com and www.voiceentertainment.net. And please welcome David to the show this evening. And David, how are you?
Good to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you on, and I really appreciate you coming on board tonight. And if you could speak just a little bit louder in that in your headset or on your phone, that'd be great.
Okay.
Excellent. So what have you been up to? Let's talk about what you've been doing these past few months.
Well, I mean, I've actually kind of gone backwards, way backwards at the same time as I'm going forward, and I'm looking at this revolution that's happening in coil building on the internet, on YouTube. And transformer coils are in every single electrical appliance we have. So you take electricity out of the wall at 120 volts and 60 hertz, and you have to transform it to run your computer or the blender, the toaster, everything, the fridge. And these coils are kind of inspired by the birth of Vortex mathematics. And where this all goes back to is my first film, Evidence the Case for NASA UFOs. We were looking at, in the year 2000, I came out with this film in late 2000, Evidence the Case for NASA UFOs, and there was no Nassim Haramein, there was no Marco Rodin, there was nothing happening in the field of vortex mathematics that was very published. I mean, some of these guys might have been doing stuff in their mind, in their basements. But I think Nassim Haramein started in 2003, 2004-ish with his ideas on black holes. And Marco Rodin about the same time, maybe a little earlier. And what happened to me on the night coming into the morning of January the 10th, 2000, the year 2000, the break of the millennium, I was in a period where I was seeing spirits extremely clearly. I had had these direct apparitions of Christ that began in 1994, in October of 94, these blinding apparitions of Christ, which I won't go into too much. But within days of those apparitions, I could see the dead as clear as regular people. And I know that sounds strange, but this began happening so frequently. I saw so many people in the middle of the night that I realized that Jesus had opened up my third eye so deeply that's why this was happening. Because it all started after these utterly blinding, brighter than 1,000 of our suns apparitions of Christ. Mm-hmm. And I became really interested in the invisible universe and how it was possible to see it. And I'd already been a professional photographer and master, darkroom black and white printer and fine art photography, and won many awards and, got, the award in my schools that I went to where I was trained. And I understood cameras, I understood light, but I really wanted to know why this was happening to me and how my brain was able to see them so perfectly. And it even got to the point that one morning, I literally wake up in the middle of the night. I feel a kind of a static electricity burst in my body in the middle of the night, and it pulls me out of my sleep, and that's when they're just approaching or coming through the walls.
Wow.
And there were 3 balls of light that were about the size of basketballs. One was purplish, one was pinkish, and one was white. And they were speaking English to me, and they were cracking jokes, and then, which made me a little nervous. Like, you're seeing these balls of light, and they're talking to you, and they're very, they're joking around. And I didn't really get into their jokes. And they said they were Arcturians. And I said, well, what's an Arcturian? I had never heard of the star Arcturus. I'm most of the science in the areas I was working in got into nuclear fusion and nuclear energy and quantum physics and particle detection. I worked for these Nobel Prize winning level particle physicists some years after this first apparition of Christ. So this gets really interesting, because what happens next is that now I get these tapes from a guy named Martin Stubbs in Vancouver, Canada, who was a program manager of Shaw Cable, and he was recording all the space shuttle missions for hours and hours and hours, and he became obsessed with them and noticed there were anomalies appearing on the tapes. And there was one mission that really got my interest, because I could see that NASA was using video cameras with special CCDs that were contracted by defense contractors to make these retrofit ordinary cameras so that they could see where you don't see. And that really interested me because of my own experience of seeing beings, beings of light. And so what happens is I start writing letters because I'm working for a Department of Defense at that time. I'm actually a defense contractor building sophisticated detection systems for hidden explosives and contraband, illegal contraband, which means drugs and everything. And our sensors were so advanced, I had so many doors open to me, and I started writing letters to scientists at NASA, and I got into this regular dialogue about the space shuttle video cameras, and they were clearly admitting to me that these cameras could see super low levels of light, so that means really, really weak amounts of light and amplifying weak amounts of light, as well as seeing into the deep bandwidths of infrared, which is just heat, energy, light, and then ultraviolet. Ultraviolet, near, and far. Ultraviolet is divided into near, far, and extreme, and there are no publicly available cameras today, even today, years later, that can see far ultraviolet. If you're lucky, you can get a publicly available camera that can see near ultraviolet. And most humans do not see ultraviolet light. There are rare cases where humans can see ultraviolet light, but it's very rare. So when I was seeing spirits, I wasn't just seeing violet color. So I knew that I was seeing full spectrum color. And more likely what I was seeing was some type of polarization or energy on ordinary light that most humans were not able to tune into. But during space shuttle missions, there were literally incidences, like there's this one mission, NASA space shuttle mission STS-80, where you see these little balls of light, probably the size of the ones I saw in my room, and about the size of basketballs, and they create a circular formation, and NASA is filming, and these things fly into position, mark their spot in the circle, and stop. Okay, so when NASA later argued that these things were just balls of dust getting close to the camera lenses, I said, well, that's just a bunch of garbage. These cameras are seeing what humans don't see, and I've seen these things with my own eyes. So I have my own personal experience, and then they're seeing the same things on the camera. And then later, when the video came out that showed the little balls of light zipping around the crop circle field and making a crop circle appear in a matter of seconds, and nobody knew where this footage had come from, it was anonymous, there was no owner of the footage, I said, those are the same balls of light that I saw. And then some years later, people started talking about Arcturus, the star Arcturus, and I'm like, wait a minute, I couldn't get a perfect identity on my experience. It took me about 2 months before someone called me and said that there's a star called Arcturus, and there's a book called We the Arcturians by Norma Milanovic, this woman who claimed to be in contact with Arcturians, and she mentions those same 3 colors in her book that I saw.
Right.
The white, the fuchsia, pinkish fuchsia, and the purpley blue. But mine were not, they didn't appear as humans with horses' heads or anything like that. They were just balls of light. And those balls of light, at the end of that experience, as I was talking to them, and I got a little nervous, they knew about my meeting with Christ, and I'm like, I don't know who you guys are, and I asked them to leave, and they shot through the ceiling, and I tilted my head back, went to sleep instantly because I was exhausted in the middle of the night, and I chased them out of body, which is, the location is Topanga, California, right next to Malibu, California, and they go into these massive, literally, probably, tens of mile long giant motherships. And they're made of pure light energy, pure light energy. So these craft are very huge, and they're going up there. So later, I'm looking at a mission named STS-75, NASA Space Shuttle mission number STS-75, which went into late February and early March of that year. And NASA was using one of these cameras, and I have a letter from NASA on that particular mission and photography of the Space Shuttle STS-75 mission when they were doing experiments with a long, 12-mile-long tethered satellite. And a tether is like an antenna that they were dragging through the Earth's ionosphere to see if they could pick up some free electricity to power the space station and experiments on the space station. And the experiment went awry, and the tethers broke off of the satellite and started drifting out into space. And it quickly became manipulated by an unknown force that was reported in the European press. And one of the astronauts, Claude Nicolier, an Italian astronaut, is the one operating the camera. And I know everything about that camera. I know that it can see near and far ultraviolet light. I have the letter from NASA. And I've got into huge arguments. I got into an argument on the Art Bell Show. The very first radio interview I ever did was in the year 2000. And I was arguing with James Oberg, who was a former NASA employee at Houston Control. And he was telling me that it was an ordinary video camera. And I said, I have a letter right in front of me saying that this can see, and it's signed by NASA, that it's a retrofitted camera. And he's saying it's an ordinary camera, and what you're seeing is just balls of dust. That are out of focus. Now, right on that point, because this eventually gets utterly explosive, you'll see how I'm going to fulfill my original statement about vortex mathematics and how vortex coils were born and what these coils are capable of. Because I'm not ignoring what I started with, I'm fulfilling it. So what ends up happening is we get the tape from NASA and Martin Stubbs, and I get one from NASA and one from Martin Stubbs. And the one from NASA has a different audio. They've taken out a lot of the dialogue that the astronauts when they were talking about what they were seeing. But we know from both tapes that Claude Nicolier, the camera operator, said that he cannot get the focus any better than that. And when a CCD digital camera's in focus, you don't get your depth of field is so phenomenal that you can have a drop of water on the lens in focus at the same time as a distant object, which means you can't get these out-of-focus airy discs that everybody tried to say that these things were. Okay, and that argument went on UFO Hunters with Pat Uskert, and they tried to duplicate it, and they produced some airy discs, but they're not in space, for one. They're not using the same camera by any means, and they tried to disprove it. They actually tried to disprove it on UFO Hunters. And where this gets really interesting is I send the tapes to one of the best optical physicists at NASA, because I knew a lot of these guys, had access to them. And his name is Dr. Louis A. Frank from the University of Wisconsin I think it's University of Wisconsin-Madison. I got to remember where Louis A. Frank is from. He's an award-winning scientist whose technology is sitting on many, many missions on many, many satellites.
Mm-hmm.
And Frank, what's that?
No, I was just agreeing. Go ahead.
Okay, and Frank had already gotten in the biggest conspiracy at NASA of all time. Nobody knows this to this day, unless they've read, my NASA UFO book, that Frank was already seeing these mysterious balls of light showing up on photographic, not video, but photographic cameras on various satellites in the outer solar system. And they had some of these satellites stationed around the Earth, and they would see these big orbs that are very soft looking, just like what we're seeing on the videotape. And he thought they behaved like water, like giant balls of cosmic water, and they were only visible in the ultraviolet, which humans can't see. And these giant balls, some of the ones he was measuring were very large. I mean, a mile across, or football field size and bigger.
Wow.
And everyone at NASA was saying, this is impossible, Frank. You can't be seeing what you say you're seeing because there's no such thing as invisible water. But he said, this is impossible. These things are coming into the upper atmosphere, and when they enter the atmosphere of the Earth, they basically dissolve and disappear. And he thought they were like drops of water that were just evaporating upon entering the Earth's atmosphere. But he didn't really know why they became invisible when they went inside the Earth's atmosphere. And so when I decided to send him my tapes, and Frank was so brilliant that with cameras and light measurements that he could tell if what was on the STS-75 mission was what UFO hunters thought it was, which is light reflecting off of dust particles in space. Now, space is a clean void. There's nothing out there. The space shuttle does do some water dumps extremely rarely. They only do it, they save every drop of water on every mission and they recycle the water. They don't really dump water. But if they dump it on the dark side of the Earth, it will freeze instantly in the minus 273 degree space background. But that's not what was happening here, because what we're seeing doesn't look like ice crystals by any means. And these cameras, like I said, once they're in focus, that's it. You can tell if it's ice. Mm-hmm. So Frank decided to analyze the tape, and he gets back to me in an email, which I still have, and he said, these are not balls of dust with light reflecting off of them. He said he measured the light curves. So right there, he was admitting, and he said they look a lot like the objects that he's been observing for years on the still cameras, and he was super excited, and he was going to have his team look at the tapes. And right at that moment, like I had already had dozens of email arguments with other scientists at NASA about the phenomena on STS-75. Things got really heated in some of these debates about what we were looking at, because I was good. I knew cameras extremely well, and I knew what I saw with my own eyes. I've seen these things with my own eyes, and they are intelligent. These are the same balls of light that are making crop circles. In fact, in William Gizecki's film, Crop Circles, The Quest for the Truth, there's videography of a kid on a tractor in England, and in broad daylight, there's one of these balls of light, and a helicopter is chasing it. And it comes up to this kid, and the moment it comes up to him on the tractor, they interview him later, he passes out. He said he fell asleep, but actually they are changing your brain waves. They're transmitting, electrically inducting your brain into a deep state, and they just put you under. So they put this kid under, and it's all on camera. And it's the same size of a ball of light that I saw, that I'm talking to. Okay, so it really gets amazing. Now what happens is I go to Hawaii. This was in early 2000, very early. This is like I have this experience. Let me back up. I have this experience on January the 10th, 2000. And this is interesting because Nikola Tesla dies on January the 8th of the 9th, 1943. And in my room, in the middle of the day, I'm having a nap, and I wake up, and there's three beings of bright light in front of me, and they're They're like angels. They're so bright, all you can see is these illuminated faces that are super bright. And I can feel, not see, that one of them is Nikola Tesla. And it's the anniversary of his birthday by 1 or 2 days. And
wow.
when you consider leap year, and that we don't live in a universe of 365 days a year, it's 365 point something.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how accurate we are in leap years, but I know that one of them was Tesla, and that would be probably the anniversary of his death. He died in the hotel New Yorker. I used to be director of the Tesla Foundation.
Nice.
And I spoke in the United States Congress on nuclear fusion as director of the Tesla Foundation in 1994, 93 or 94, I'm trying to remember. So anyway, this gets really amazing. All of a sudden, they're hovering in front of me, these blinding beings of light. They're not as blinding as meeting Christ, but they are definitely beneath him in brilliance and love and ecstasy and peace. And they flash this vortex mathematical theory into my mind. And I immediately just scoured for paper. I'm looking around the apartment for paper, and they're still there. And I get the paper, and they're gone. And I understand the whole thing in a matter of seconds. This brand new theory of this thing called the galaxy clock. And I put the galaxy clock in my NASA UFO video, which the film is dated 2004, but that's when it was registered. We were selling it in late 2000, and it was all over. Back then it was Google Video, not YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
And we had millions of people watching it for free. And we put a lot of work into making this film, and nobody even sent us 10 or 15 cents a view. They just simply were obsessed with it. And in it, you can still see this on YouTube today. There's a scene of me showing you the galaxy clock and the birth of vortex mathematics and how black holes really work, what's really happening in a black hole, as well as in the event horizon, as well as a new force, a new understanding of gravity and the bending of space and time, the curvature of space-time, which goes faster than the speed of light. And I'm showing this mathematically in the clock. People got obsessed with that galaxy clock. People were calling me. They were other researchers calling me, and they said, that thing is a breakthrough. Well, I go to Hawaii after the discovery, and I meet this zero-point energy scientist named Steve Okerlund, who was being funded by Joe Firmage. And Joe Firmage was this U.S. web guy that was a billionaire who liquidated about $500 million cash and announced in the San Francisco Chronicle and everywhere that he was going to be funding UFO and anti-gravity research. And NASA was furious. Everyone was furious that this guy had so much money and he was going into the subject of UFOs. Well, he was funding Steve Okerlund in Hawaii, and I met Steve. I just met him through a friend, and Steve saw the NASA tape, and he said he wants to, because when you zoom in on these UFOs in the tether incident, you have a 12-mile-long tether, and you can see these giant disks are passing behind the tether. And the tethered satellite is several miles from the cameras on the space shuttle, and it's ionized about a quarter of a mile wide with noble gases that were, according to the Italian press, this is impossible. It's like the movie 2001. The nitrogen fuel tanks on the satellite and 2 gyroscopes had been manipulated by some unknown force, and they were turned on and off, and the nitrogen fuel tank was emptied. The nitrogen fuel tank gets emptied and surrounds the electric field around the tether. The tether is just this 12-mile-long antenna, which you could not see from the space shuttle cameras far away. But the gas that was emptied out of the tanks on the satellite basically got trapped in the electrostatic field around the antenna and became ionized, which means it becomes luminous. And it's self-luminous like a neon tube. Mm-hmm. But it also has a certain amount of sunlight reflecting off of it because it's a charged field. And in space, the background is so clean and it's so cold that this heat signature shows up amazingly clear on the cameras. And then you see these disks that because they're going behind it, you have relativity. They're at least 2 to 3 miles wide because they measure 2 to 3 miles across the 12-mile length of the tether. And NASA was trying to argue that it's an optical illusion. They're really going in front, and they're just pieces of dust. But Louis A. Frank, one of the best physicists at NASA, said they're not pieces of dust. There's no way they're pieces of dust. Pieces of dust don't have that much light.
Mm-hmm.
And he knows the camera, he knows the wavelength of the camera, and they're pulsing. They're pulsing. And so my friend Steve Okerlund, he buys the best VCR he can get because we need to go frame by frame. This is a VHS tape in these days. You know, we didn't have digital editing at that time. This is VHS. So I couldn't do this with a regular VHS player, and he got this big TV, and we look at the pulses, and oh my God, frame by frame, we're seeing this repeating pattern of a black hole in the middle of the UFO and a Fibonacci black spiraling vortex wave coming out of the middle of it.
Wow.
And we went, oh my God, there's no way this is pieces of dust producing these kind of waveforms. I mean, I couldn't believe the UFO Hunters team didn't look at the vortex because that disproves the dust theory by far. There's no way they could get, and the vortex keeps repeating itself coming out of the black hole. Now, only months later in July, right across from Stonehenge in a farmer's field, the same vortex suddenly appears in a matter of less than half an hour. There's a pilot I think it's in William Gazecki's film. He's flying over Stonehenge, and he looks in the field is clean. And he turns around and comes back, and the crop circles appeared. Full, super spiral geometry. There's no way that anybody could have made that in 20 minutes. He said, or an hour. He said no one could do that in 4 hours.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same degree of curvature. So if I look at different degrees of curvature of spirals, I can superimpose the NASA UFO spiral right on top of the crop circle, and they match perfectly. And then my galaxy clock has this, I literally take the clock to the same degree of spiral curvature to match both the crop circle and the UFO completely by accident. And we went, oh my God, we have a match here. We have a perfect match. So my vortex mathematics is out. It gets millions of views on YouTube. And I know personally there are two guys that really became very, very famous in the world of vortex mathematics on top of what I had started. And one was Nassim Harriman, came out with his theory on black holes and did a video called Beyond the Event Horizon or something like that. And I started watching his video, and I said, I can't watch this because, you know, I'm way ahead of this already. I understand vortex mathematics on a level that probably even nobody does today because they didn't take my galaxy clock to the extreme that I've taken it to.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not seeing the faster than light. You see, Einstein proved that gravity, to the extent of the curvature of space-time that he measured, is the same speed as light. And that is true in my galaxy clock only in the beginning of the curvature. So he's saying that space is curved, and if you look at a sun and you think of it as a giant steel ball sitting on a rubber sheet and you set it down, it creates a dimple, right? It sets in. And then if you throw a little marble into that curvature, it spirals around the sun and eventually crashes into the sun, which is what gravity objects do.
Mm-hmm.
So he thought he understood gravity and the warping of the fabric of space-time. But then Einstein took the warping, curvature, vortex space-time even further and unified his theories with another scientist named Rosenberg. And they created the Einstein-Rosen bridge, which is the basic theory of black hole. Not wormholes, whose function is very similar to a black hole.
Mm-hmm.
And they said the only way you could travel faster than the speed of light is if you created an Einstein-Rosen bridge and you folded the fabric of space-time like folding a rubber sheet, and you create this mini vortex between 2 points. You create a shortcut in space-time, and therefore you've circumvented the speed of light. But the problem with Einstein-Rosen bridges is the amount of energy you needed to fold mass.
Mm-hmm.
Very heavy stuff at those distances would require the negative energy of 100 million suns. Now, there's 100 million suns in the Milky Way galaxy, and the Rosen bridge you would create, Einstein-Rosen bridge with that much energy, would be only big enough to fit a quarter through. So I knew there was something wrong with the theory, and Einstein was only looking at mild curvatures in the fabric of space-time. But my galaxy clock started measuring super curvatures, super vortexes in the curvature of space-time, and I could see, without changing the speed of light in a wave vortex oscillation, I could see this third force growing called the curvature of space and time that would cross my light speed time in 1 second. It would go multiples of light speed. And the more curved the fabric of space-time got, the gravity force space and timeline would surpass the light speed timeline by ultimately thousands of times. And I went, oh my God, at this level of curvature of the gravity space-time, you could do wormholes with way less energy. And not only that, it didn't look like Einstein was right about black holes and his theory of how much mass and weight charge and energy there was there. Because E equals mc squared, energy is equal to mass times the speed of light squared. So the formula converts mass as weight back into pure weightless electromagnetism and back and forth. So energy can be both physical and it can be light at the same time. So with his own theory, I said, let's put a orbit of a subatomic particle with mass on my clock, on the galaxy clock, right on it. And I started getting photographs of spiraling orbit subatomic particles, and immediately I noticed that the heavier the particle was, the less curvature of the fabric of space-time it had. And the lighter the particle was, like electrons are basically the lightest of all particles, electrons and neutrinos, they had the most curvature, and therefore the lowest amount of mass. And that meant, oh my God, in the subatomic universe, it's the opposite of what he's saying. That energy is going the opposite way, that heavy weight energy is converting into pure light energy before it goes into a black hole.
That's
not getting heavier. As he thought it had to get heavier to pull all those suns and stars and planets in there. But when you look at what all those stars and suns and planets are on a literally molecular level, and then a quantum level, which is the atom and smaller, and molecules are bigger. They're the bonds of molecules into different shapes and geometries. They're just being stripped out of their orbits and going into this higher frequency wave state, and therefore they're losing all their mass. So that means if a spaceship can create its own Einstein-Rosen bridge vortex magnetic field and warp the fabric of space-time, it can lose its mass and weigh nothing. And if it weighs nothing, it doesn't cost anything to make a wormhole. As opposed to costing the negative energy of 100 million suns for a whole year. The total negative deficit energy of all of the suns in our galaxy for a whole year. And that's why many black holes and wormholes don't make any sense to anybody. Like, it's just pie in the sky physics. It's fun stuff on paper, but nobody can produce energy levels on that scale.
Wow, that's incredible.
So there was the NASA UFO with a spiraling vortex matching a crop circle that appears across from Stonehenge only months later in July. So you go from March to July. And then the spiral pattern started appearing in crop circles regularly. And it was appearing before then, but nothing to the degree. I mean, crop circles in their infancy in the late 70s were just circles. And when you looked at the weave of the grass, it was certainly a vortex, just in a simple circle. But then they got more complex. And when you weeded out the fake circles from the paddleboard guys and to the real circles always had a double vortex, a clockwise and a counterclockwise weave right on top of each other. And then you were looking at massive patterns in the fields. So I was able to put crop circles onto my galaxy clock and see what was really happening. Just like I put the subatomic particles on my clock and I said, wait a minute, my theory in black holes is completely different than Einstein's. And within a very short period of time, I was introduced to the work of Marco Rodin, and Marco Rodin and I have met, and he's a big fan of my galaxy clock. And so I know at the very least we've inspired each other. But it's very possible his ideas were born out of my galaxy clock. Because he got really deep. I love Marco Rodin's work. It's fantastic. And he got into these different lengths of dimensional windings on a tube torus, which is a donut. So he was looking at a vortex in 3D, 3 dimensions. And I was looking at a vortex in 2 dimensions, which is a flat plane. And what he did by putting it in 3 dimensions on the tube torus was brilliant. And so what ends up happening next is, 2003 and 4, Nassim Harriman is coming out with the same theory about black holes and mini black holes, and he did this DVD on the event. He calls it something, the Event Horizon. And somebody sent it to me, and they said, "Have you ever seen this? This stuff is amazing." And I'm like, I've been doing this stuff for years, and it's highly probable because I know Nassim's original partners that he originally was working with, and the people that trained him were all following my stuff. But see, this is what happens with evolution. It's like I don't own it. It's nature. The Fibonacci spiral. It's all nature. It's all everywhere. It's in the crop circles. But we're all cooperatively co-creating an evolution together. Mm-hmm. And Nassim comes out with this video. He becomes super famous in a very short period of time. And I'd already been on the scene for 6 or 7 years by the time he was there. And I was moving into making vortex coils on my own and doing my own theoretical testing and not really publicizing it so much. And then what happened is all these guys were looking at Marco Rodin's vortex math, and he didn't, he told me he wasn't doing this to make coils, electronic coils that could transform the world. That's how people saw it. They took his math and said, we can make a coil out of this. And these guys started making coils. And some of his coils today, Marco Rodin-inspired coils, and I love these guys. These young guys all give credit to Marco Rodin to where they learn this stuff. And it's very wonderful that they do that. They don't just take it and say it's mine. Mm-hmm. And Rodin was inspired by my work and many other people's work. And so so you imagine, you go back, you're looking at 3 beings of light appear, flash this vortex mathematics into my mind. Only months later, I'm looking at NASA UFOs that are pulsing with waveforms that we're able to identify that fit right into the vortex math theory that Nikola Tesla gave me. And then you're seeing crop circles with the exact same degree of curvature of spiral that was showing up in the NASA UFO. So you can put it all together now. You can see that the crop circles are being made by the balls of light that have been captured on video in making the crop circles, are the same balls of light that are appearing in space. Mm-hmm. That are the same balls of light that have appeared to me I've seen them at least 5 times now, right in front of me. And then it goes way, way beyond from there. It just gets more and more credible where this thing is going.
That's fascinating. Well, what's attracting these balls of light? Insofar as your energy field, is it something that you're producing energetically too that's attracting that?
Well, that's a great question. See, I started building vortex coils and starting them 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And it's 2014, so 2004, I was in the process of starting it, and I built. Mine are different than the rodent windings. He winds. He's got guys winding at 30-degree angles, which is the phi angle, the golden angle. But the golden angle is actually 60 and 30 degrees on a Fibonacci rectangle. You do a Fibonacci rectangle, and then you make a triangle through the rectangle, and then you measure your slope angles, and they're 30 and 60 degrees, which I figured out myself. I don't think Marco Rodin even knows that he's actually winding on the phi angle. Nobody's ever put that point out. I think I'm probably one of the first people, or the first person, to do a simple math test and measure the golden angle. And the reason I got interested in the golden angle is the Egyptians were obsessed with, when a person died, they would lie the mummy at the golden angle, so that when the soul was leaving the body, it would leave it at the sacred angle.
Mm.
And so I wanted to know what the golden angle was, and I thought, how come I couldn't find it on YouTube? I couldn't find it on the internet. I Googled golden angle, and I couldn't. You can try this, and you can't find it anywhere. So I just did it. You make a golden rectangle. You go 10 centimeters on your upside times 10.1.6, 1.618, which is phi, and then the rest of the numbers to get it exact. And then you draw you slice it in half across to get a rectangle, and then you take your compass and measure your angles. And it's perfect 60 degrees and 30 degrees because you have two different angles.
Mm.
So that's the angle the Egyptians were obsessed with and I thought, wow, that's amazing, because that's not the angle of the Great Pyramid. The Great Pyramid's angle is 51 degrees and 51 minutes in measuring in degrees, minutes, and seconds. So why were they obsessed with the golden angle? Well, the golden ratio is everywhere in the Great Pyramid mathematics. So what happened for me next, to answer your question, to attract these experiences, is I started realizing that frequency is the language of the universe. If you think of the movie Contact with Jodie Foster and this idea that astronomers are looking for the language that the universe would universally communicate at, and I was looking in the movie, they're saying it's mathematics, and they were using prime numbers. And prime numbers are any number that are only divisible by themselves and the number 1. And there's you can Google the first 1,000 prime numbers online, and I've done a lot of work with prime numbers that I won't go into, too much math right now. But so what happens next is we're looking at crop circles, which are increasing, and there's more and more fake crop circles, so it's harder and harder to find the good ones, and you're looking for the ones that are really trying to teach us on this chalkboard in the middle of a mess of fakery. And I'm very, very interested in the crop circles because I know the beings that make them. I know them personally. I know they're from Arcturus. And I know that some of them might be from somewhere else. And then it became cult in the crop circle movement for them to say, yeah, the Arcturians are the ones that are making the circles. And I thought, wow, how did they know that? Well, a lot of the people who go into these circles are having their own experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And they're getting the same information. And there are people that are regularly in contact, with the circle makers now. So I started following the crop circles, but then I had a massive, massive revelation that if the reason frequency is the language of the universe is the way you measure frequency is you take the wavelength of a spiraling wave, a circular wave, or a square wave, and you take the speed of light, and you can take the speed of light in miles, feet and miles, and you can take the speed of light in metric, which is in meters. And when you use large wavelengths, like to measure the frequency of Earth has its own frequency, which Nikola Tesla and Schumann said is 7.83 hertz, but Tesla measured it at Colorado Springs. And I believe he measured it again in New York, and he got almost the same number. Well, the way the Earth generates its frequency is it in the gas envelope, the oxygen, nitrogen environment, as well as the crust. you get electrons get excited in the crust and in the gas envelope because of solar discharging. And some people think, well, it's the lightning strikes on the Earth that generate the frequency, but it isn't. It's electromagnetism from the sun's rays and the pulses coming off the sun through the photoelectric effect, which is converting sunlight, electromagnetic energy, into electric energy, which is when they cross paths, they transfer from light back into mass. That's Einstein's formula. You go, energy is either light or it's mass, and you can measure it both ways. So it converts from light back to mass and mass back into light. And so as the light is coming in from the sun, it hits the mass particles in the Earth, and they get excited. And when they get excited, they start spinning. And if you take an electromagnet, imagine a steel shaft of, just 2 inches of steel rod, and you take copper magnet wire and you wrap it around it, and then you run electricity through it, you have a magnet. So your electrons are running sideways or 90 degrees to the north and south pole of the magnet. It's the same with our planet. The electrons are spinning, most of them are spinning 90 degrees or parallel to the equator. And the magnetic field of the Earth is on the north and the south pole. So now what happens is right above the movement of the electrons, you get an electromagnetic signal, which is a light signal that spins right over top of the electrons. And therefore, because it spins at the speed of light, you just take the distance around the planet and it doesn't matter whether you do it in feet, in inches, in miles, or you do it in metric. If your resolution is good, you will get the same frequency mathematically, and that is amazing. I got 7.5-ish at the equator. I don't want to give out the exact number on the show because I have the exact number to 20 different decimal points of accuracy, because NASA went out into space with satellites and they used radio telemetry to measure the exact radius of the Earth. And if you know the radius, you know the distance around the planet. So I went, oh my God, I'm getting a different frequency than Tesla. Mine is closer to 7.45 and 5 because I measured the poles and the equator. And I'm friends with a physicist, the same physicist that made Nassim Haramein famous, Elizabeth Rauscher, and she was at my house. And I've known her for a long time, off and on. And I said, according to the math, the frequency of the Earth isn't 7.83, it's closer to 7.5 at the equator. And according to the math, and she said, that's amazing because we went down to the equator and measured the frequency, and it was closer to 7.5, and we didn't know why, because Tesla got 7.83. And I said, well, that tells me that the frequency changes the higher up you get near the poles, because the distance around the Earth at 90 degrees to the North Pole is tiny compared to the equator. So you get this whole bandwidth of frequency. So holy cow, if I could measure the frequency of any planet, I can also do the frequencies for any star. And because NASA, it turns out, knows the radius of dozens and dozens of stars out there. They use a trigonometry parallax system, and they get very accurate data on the radius of Sirius, for example, A and B, which are quite close at 8.7 or 8.3 light years from Earth. Alpha Centauri, 4.3 light years from Earth, very accurate. And even the Pleiades, they have the radius on 5 Palladian suns. Now, we're beings of frequency. We are beings of frequency. Think about what this means. This is where it gets really, really mind-bending on how to create a mini wormhole between yourself and a distant star system, and that's what I started doing. I started, I had secretly been building coils, and I'd met with some of the Marco Rodin coil builders. I met with a guy in Sedona who's quite well known, Jamie Buter, who was doing amazing Marco Rodin coils. And I didn't tell any of these people what my coils were doing, but my windings were different than theirs. So I thought, well, mine are different, but I'm getting amazing results, and I don't really want to put my videos on YouTube of my coil designs. So I started getting more interested in not so much the design of the coil, because I could see similar performances on even simpler coil designs than some of the most complicated designs out there. And I thought it had more to do with frequency, because frequency is the universal language. It doesn't matter whether you're from another star system and you measure the distance around your star in a completely different foot and inch or meter than we do. You always get the same number.
Mm-hmm.
And the other number that is the same regardless of math and counting systems is ratio. Ratio is how many times a foot goes into 2 feet, right, or 2.5 feet. If you convert it to any counting system, your ratio is always the same. And ratio is how music and harmonies are all tuned. They're all tuned to ratios. So you realize that this is the language of the universe is frequency and ratio. And that's far more important than geometry. And it's not that geometry is not important. I'm not ditching geometry. I'm not ditching the geometry and the crop circles. It is important because different geometries produce different ratios, because there's different lengths on the sides of different geometries. So they produce a natural analog ratio.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Go back to the NASA UFO and the spiral pulse coming out of it, and look at the degree. I look at the degree of curvature, and I go, this is a ratio. This is a specific ratio. I'll tell you how amazing frequency gets, because frequency, the way the universe set up planets, single planets alone, is every one of them is a different size and has a different distance around it, therefore a different wavelength, therefore a different frequency. And the reason every planet and every star is a different frequency is because that's how tuning and telecommunication works. It works by generating a frequency, and whenever you have 2 or more frequency generators at the same frequency, we're talking on the phone right now at the same frequency. The carrier wave that's generating the frequency that's carrying my voice so that you can hear me is the same. It sets up an automatic bridge of communication, if you will, a tiny micro wormhole, if you will, but with no mass. And that's what frequency is. Frequency is the ability to, regardless of distance, to tune 2 or more people, millions of people even, to that same frequency so they can all be together and hear each other. So when your phone rings, there are tiny, tiny crystal oscillators made of quartz crystal in your phone that won't ring until the microwave tower sends out the signal at the exact same frequency as your phone. And the higher frequencies get, like right now we're in the gigahertz, which is billion hertz frequency waves, the easier it is to have a billion different phone numbers, because you only have to be 1 digit off way down the decimal point, and then the neighbor's phone doesn't ring, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in the early days, when cordless phones were in the megahertz range, sometimes you could hear your neighbor, because a megahertz wave is, 100 feet. The wavelength, it's pretty huge. So the waves would cross over sometimes, and you'd be stuck, hearing your neighbors on the phone. But when you got to gigahertz, that doesn't happen as easily unless somebody's, only a few feet away from you.
Mm-hmm.
So the higher the frequency, the more phone numbers you can have, and it doesn't get mixed up. So the universe works the same way. Every planet and every star has its own wavelength frequency. And therefore, we biologically can even psychically tune to that. And I'll show you how that happens. I decided to do a study on the frequencies of all of our 9 planets and the different frequencies of the human brain. And this just blew my mind, because I was looking at the idea, because our planets are so close to us in relative to the speed of light or electromagnetism, that in the law of electrical transference of energy, which is inductance. See, if I take a piece of copper wire and I spin it, and I make an electromagnet out of it, or I don't, and I just run electricity through it, and I take another coil a foot away with no electricity into it, I can measure electricity in the coil at a distance coming from the one that has electricity. That's called inductance. And I thought, what if our brains are producing all these different frequencies because the 9 planets are producing them and inducting them over a pretty short distance in space into our brains? And what are the odds that I would take NASA data on every planet, because NASA knows the radius at perfect, more than 10 decimal points of accuracy on every one of our planets. And I did the math, and I did the frequencies for Earth and Venus and Mars and Mercury. I went, oh my God, look at these numbers. These numbers fit perfectly inside of the tunability of the 5 major brainwave states. So you have delta brainwaves are deep, deep sleep, deep healing, extremely deep meditation brainwaves from 0.1 hertz all the way up to 4 hertz. And then from there you go 5 hertz. And then from there you go to theta, and theta is 5 hertz to somewhere around 8 hertz. And I went, oh my God, look, we dream in theta. It's known that rapid eye movement and dreaming for most humans happens in theta. So we dream at the frequency of our own planet. And this is really trippy, because during a 14-year period where I was seeing ghosts and star beings and spirits on a regular basis, I used to go to sleep. I was living in this apartment in Vancouver, Canada at the time, and I would see my neighbors floating through the walls, drifting. And the aura is really amazing. They were a lot of luminous psychedelic colors. Like, the aura is really electric. And I was looking at them going, their eyes are closed, like they're not even aware, but they're actually out of their bodies by, at least 20 feet. And they're just drifting kind of aimlessly, and I would see 2 or 3 of them at the same time. That's pretty trippy. Well, when we're relaxed, it's kind of like you're driving a car, but you're doing text messages and you crash into a lamppost, right? When you're out of body, if you're not aware that you left your body, your eyes are closed and you're just in this process of mental imagery and thinking, and you're cooperatively dreaming your dreaming world with everybody else's dreaming bodies, because they're electric. Pure electricity. And this is easy to prove, because you can take a human person, you take a signal generator and you generate 1 megahertz signal, and you put the 1 megahertz signal into a steel wire. You have a person hold on to the steel wire, and on their other hand, you get a tri-field meter and put it in radio wave mode, and you hold it 4 inches away from their other hand, and their other hand's transmitting the signal. The meter will go off. I just did this at a lecture in person. So that's proof that your body is transmitting radio waves. Transmitting. And at nighttime, this works better at night. If you have a bad, you're listening on the AM dial on your AM radio, which not many people do anymore because of the internet, but you just put your hand near the antenna, only 2 inches away from the antenna, and the signal improves. And if you touch the antenna, the signal's way better. It's because you are an antenna. You're made of the same materials that we use now in radios, which is quartz crystal and minerals, and layered into the quartz crystal in these transistors and crystal oscillators that generate frequencies. So we are frequency transmitter receivers, and new scientists, a Nobel Prize winner named Luc Montagnier, who studied viruses, did an experiment with human DNA and gave it the frequency of Earth. in that range. It was like 7 point something hertz, and I was like, why isn't he do the exact frequency of Earth? Why is he just doing 7 hertz, 7.1 hertz? Well, he wanted to see if DNA, because DNA is a coil, and as soon as you have a coil in electronics, you have an inductor, a transmitter receiver. And he wanted to see if DNA at its high frequency wavelength could pick up a low frequency, and it did. It picks up perfectly the frequency of Earth and lower. So if DNA can read frequencies, then what does that mean? It means...
Are you there?
I'll tell you where all the planets fall. All the planets fall. The frequency of Mars is alpha. Mars is right next to us. And alpha brainwaves are necessary for concentration, organization, and recollection of thoughts. So if you're not getting enough alpha brainwave activity, it means you can't remember much of what you're being told or learning. So alpha is very good. It's the coherent part of the brain. So quite amazing that Mars is so close to us. And now there's a movie called Resonance Beams of Frequency that went all over the internet, and it was all about how cell phone towers are hurting people's brains and their nervous systems. Some people are getting really sick. But they did an amazing experiment in this movie. They took this group of kids, and because the frequency that Earth generates is at the surface and above, it's not underneath the Earth. You know, inside the Earth you get electrons moving, but you're not getting the electromagnetic frequency of the Earth. And the frequency of Earth at 7.5 hertz is equator, 7.83 in Colorado. What happens is you need that frequency to relax, to rest, to meditate. You need the frequency of Mars, which is closer to 4. See, here it is. The frequency at the equator is 7.48075. That's what the math tells me the frequency at the equator is. Now, the frequency of Mercury is just underneath 20 hertz, just a tad under 20 hertz. And what's amazing about 20 hertz is that's where you start to hear. You hear from 20 to 20,000 hertz if your ears are healthy. Now, I thought that fact alone was really interesting because the other thing about 20 hertz is rice. Have you heard of royal rice?
Of course, yes.
Yeah. If you look on the rice frequency list, you'll notice that 20 hertz is the most healing frequency to the body. It heals more things than anything, and that's Mercury. Now, Mercury goes into retrograde 4 times a year because Mercury experiences 4 trips around the sun for every 1 year, where we experience 1 trip around the sun. And so it passes us because it's closer to the sun, its orbit is smaller. And when it goes behind the sun, we lose 20 hertz. We don't have our 20 hertz transmitter anymore. So everybody goes crazy. Everything goes wrong in Mercury in retrograde because you need 20 hertz. That's the waking part of the brain.
That's fascinating. And David, we're going to take a very quick break. Everybody stay tuned. We'll be right back. Dark Matter Radio Network.
Yeah. Well, no, next week.
Welcome back, everybody, to Dark Matter Radio Network. I'm Solaris BlueRaven, and I'm here with my special guest, the brilliant David Serita. And his websites are lightstreamtechnologies.com and voiceentertainment.net. And David, you with me?
Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating information. What an honor it is to have you on tonight. I really appreciate you being here. You're a brilliant man.
Thank you.
Yes.
Well, I've been meditating every day for 30 years and having mystical experiences, and I like one thing that's good about science is it teaches you how and why things work, how and why the body heals, so that you can get a combination of consciousness and technology to heal, to have out-of-body experiences, and to really explore the universe. Mm-hmm. And, being a human being and being stuck on a planet in such an enormous field of space seems like you're in prison. I mean, it seems like my whole life I felt like, is this it? This is all we have, and we have these politicians that, in my opinion, are responsible for destroying the ecosystems of the planet, mm-hmm. and blocking zero-point energy and free energy research. And I experienced, when I spoke in Congress in 1994 with brilliant Nobel Prize winners and an MIT physicist who, my boss at that time, Magwitch, he's from Yugoslavia, he's from the same country as Nikola Tesla, and actually he had a big role in Tesla's memorial that was built for him. And Magwitch was an early magnetic field vortex engineer. He actually built a what's known as a resonant cavity chamber. Imagine a round tubular chamber where he was firing in non-radioactive beams of helium-3 fuel, which is non-radioactive nuclear fuel, into this flower pattern. It looks like a flower of life pattern that produced the highest temperatures in this geometry of any nuclear fusion device in history. He got ion temperatures of 10 billion degrees. The sun is about 37. There's different layers of the sun's atmosphere that have different temperatures, but none of the sun's temperatures approaching 100,000 degrees come anywhere near 10 billion degrees. But Magwich's heat was only confined to this tiny little space in the middle of this flower pattern, where he would fuse helium-3 fuel, and the helium-3 fuel would produce 1 billion watts in a square meter. So in 1 square meter, you could power a whole city. Mm. And NASA and everybody was interested in us. But when we spoke in Congress under Gore and Clinton, we were shut down, completely shut down. So he designed this reactor and this vortex mass theory in the 1980s at Princeton University, where Einstein taught. And he was a professor at Rutgers, and he spent a good 20 or 30 years of his life trying to get that technology further funded. And now, today, my interests are both in spiritual interests, using consciousness with frequency. You see, once you realize that we're beings of our planet's frequency, and we dream at our planet's frequency, and there's different bands of frequencies in the 7 to 10 hertz range up and down the sides of the planet, depending on where you live. So your location is really part of the frequency you experience, because your frequency is a little different than mine. It depends where you live. Mm-hmm. But the brain will be in that same state when you're dreaming. So the astral or electric, more subtle electric energy field of the planet is where my experience has been, is where all the spirits are in the dreaming world. And most dreamers, the eyes are closed and they're not conscious. Now, one time, this is really wild, but in living in Sedona, Arizona, when I was seeing so many beings. I mean, it was mind-blowing what I was seeing. I was seeing angels with my eyes open and with a bright light in our rooms. And one night, I see my wife floating back into her body. And I watch, she's wearing this beautiful pearly gown, which she wasn't wearing, into bed. And she's floating down into her body, but her eyes are closed. But it looked like she was so directed and so grateful. And the moment her astral body touched her physical body and came back in, she rolled over in the bed. I went, oh my God. I said, this is incredible. So what we're doing at nighttime is, if you're able to change frequencies, for example, to the Pleiades, star system, and this is where it gets more interesting. When you have 2 or more stars in a constellation, the signature is so much more unique than a single planet's frequency. So every different planet, every different star has a different frequency that it's generating, because they're all different sized drums, basically. Mm-hmm. And so you can tune the same way we tune radios to that frequency, but the difference is human organisms, plants, and humans' auras, the speed of the aura has been measured by a scientist named Fritz Albert Popp in Germany. A good, traditional physicist did measurements on the speed of biophotons, living light particles of living coming off of living things, and they go instantaneous over huge distances. So that would mean that physical light emissions from plants and humans have an advantage over radio telecommunications, which are limited to a much slower speed, the speed of light.
Mm-hmm.
So if you could tune a plant and DNA to the frequency of something too far away like the Pleiades, would you make contact? And that's what I started doing. I built transmitters and I started doing the math on the Pleiades. And because I was obsessed with that star system, because when I was a kid growing up in Berkeley, California in 1967, 68, I saw a flying saucer with dozens of other people that day on the street. And in the following weeks, they were communicating with me behind sleep very clearly. And I saw them. They were very tall, very, very tall humans, very kind and very loving. And they were showing me how their craft worked. And they showed me their star system, which they don't name Pleiades, but they just showed me what it looked like, the cluster.
Mm-hmm.
And when I used to play hide-and-go-seek in San Francisco in the 60s, I would be counting to 100 looking at that star system. And so when I figured out that I could do this experiment to communicate with Pleiades, I picked that star system to do the first, transmitter on. This is probably 5 or 6 years ago when I did my first transmission on my birthday, August 21st that year in Sedona. And I actually ran my wife, Crystal, she sang the song by Frank Sinatra, Fly Me to the Moon. And I just ran that through the transmitter. I ran it through all the frequencies and the ratio of Pleiades, but I did it in a way that I'm not willing to share publicly yet. It's a very advanced transmitter, and it involved interfacing transistor oscillators with plant DNA.
Wow.
So they sent the signal for me, but see, when Fritz Popp found that plants send faster than light signals, he basically opened up a can of worms and possibilities, because now you can Google DNA transistors, and there are tons of articles about how that's the future. DNA transistors. They don't say why, but we know why, because my work says that DNA will. Fritz Albert Popp found that DNA seems to be the origin of the faster than light signal in the plants.
Mm-hmm.
So, and because we have DNA and we emit biophotons, us too. But we're more murky, and we have a lot of EMF pollution we're surrounded with.
Yeah.
So we're a little more distorted. It takes longer to tune us. But when I did this, I sent it out, and I had not seen a spirit. See, I hadn't seen a spirit for quite a long time. And I knew that what had happened was instantaneously the result of the transmission, because I'm falling asleep, and I audibly hear this. I hear, "Congratulations, we received your message. Now what do you want to ask us?" And I leaped out of bed. I mean, this was a very gentle, loving male voice that was audible. It's not like you're how if you're looking for an intuitive voice, you're kind of hearing your own mind talking to itself. It's not like that. It's completely audible to the brain.
Mm.
And I leaped out of bed, and I went, "Oh my God, it works, and I was so excited. And I said I hadn't seen the Pleiadians since I was a kid, and I'd lost contact with them. And my mom had divorced my real father right in the middle of that experience. And then when she divorced my stepfather, David Cooper, from Texas, my four brothers, and I are sent back to Canada to be with our real father, who's a meditator, yogi, PhD in psychology from Berkeley, living in Vancouver. So our lives changed, and I had no contact. But what had happened is Billy Meyer the Billy Meyer story was on the Canadian news in 1973. And he began getting visited by the flying saucers that he allegedly photographed in 1972. So that's only a few years after my encounter in 1968, 67.
Oh, that's interesting.
Now, the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab sits right up on the hill above where I had my sighting. And years later, at a UFO conference, I'm speaking, and I actually talked about my Pleiadian contacts and that experience. And a gentleman comes up to me in the elevator, and he said, "I work at the space lab up on the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab Hill, where the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab Hill is." And I had sat up at that lab with Glenn Seaborg, who chaired the Atomic Energy Commission under Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon, because he was working with Magwitch on his fusion device. So I knew Seaborg. I had access to Seaborg, who had 37 levels of top secret clearance. And I'm sitting there with his assistant, and I'm telling him about my UFO sighting right here. I said, "You can see it from this lab." Well, this gentleman comes up to me in the UFO conference. He said, "I work at the space lab right there, right next to the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab." And he said in 1972, we all saw a flying saucer out the window, and he said it wasn't ours. So they were regularly coming there to Berkeley.
Wow.
And there's something going on at that lab. And Seaborg said about anti-gravity, he goes, if you build an anti-gravity device, you have something far beyond nuclear fusion, and we don't need to be wasting our time doing nuclear fusion because anti-gravity is way beyond fusion. Wow. That's what Seaborg was telling me. There's the guy that authorized all the nuclear tests and unimaginable things that he was doing that were very, very dark. And he was trying to help this non-radioactive nuclear fusion device see the light of day that was all based on vortex magnetic field collisions of non-radioactive fuels. And then a scientist at NASA named Earl Van Landingham spent a lot of time with me on the phone, and Van Landingham was a rocket scientist. He was one of the German rocket scientists who later became head of all space access and technology at NASA. And I knew him, and we talked a lot, and he was always wondering, how is it going? Are you guys getting your funding? Because we really need your helium-3 reactor because a meter-squared reactor that produces 1 billion watts, he said we could be doing ion propulsion at 1/10 the speed of light with that reactor. 1/10 the speed of light. That's what Earl told me. He said the reason is because the charged particles that Magwitch was generating in his vortex fusion machine were so strong at 18 million electron volt protons, which are very heavy. He said you can fire those out of the back of the drive and they'll fire out at 1/10 the speed of light, and the spaceship will go the other way at 1/10 the speed of light, which is like 67 million miles an hour, somewhere around there, way faster than anything. Nobody's nowhere near that speed now.
No.
But we were shut down. Al Gore was supposed to be at the hearings. He never showed up. Harry Hamlin from LA Law was with us, and all these, prize winners were with us, and we were turned down. And then every time we had an investor interested, the investor got a call from Department of Energy saying to stay away from our company.
That's annoying.
So where this goes, so part of me, the next thing I do, going back to the transmissions to the Pleiades, is I record a bunch of questions to them, like, where have you been? Why haven't I seen you my whole life? And I'm writing all these questions down, and I record my voice addressing the Pleiadian Council, and I send them out through the transmitter the next night, which is the night of my birthday, about 5 years ago. And, oh my God, the next night, it's mind-blowing what happens. It's utterly mind-blowing what they tell me. What they tell me is that there are 3 presidents that have been fully disclosed the truth about UFOs, and Kennedy and Eisenhower and Ford, President Ford. And Ford, they showed me Ford, Gerald Ford, President Ford, and they showed me that he knew and that he was actually had meetings with them. And they actually showed me what those meetings looked like and where they took place, all in my dream that night, perfectly clearly. And I didn't even know President Ford. I thought he was a pretty stiff guy. He was a one-term president, I think. And I never thought he would be interested in UFOs, so I Google it the next day, and sure enough, Ford was the only president who ordered a full congressional investigation into UFOs because he had his own experience. I didn't even know that.
That's interesting.
But it goes deeper and deeper. That experience, they disclosed that the Kennedys were about to disclose the truth about Roswell and everything about ET contact, but a dark force emerged in the U.S. government that basically told the Kennedys, you can't do this, because the ETs are a threat. They saw them as a threat rather than a shared knowledge, like Close Encounters of the Third Kind kind of thing, my favorite movie of all time. So, and what they showed me in the dream is that there were files on every single ufologist alive, and they showed me my file. And there are times where you're really risking it to be in this area. So the crop circle thing got buried. It got buried by fakers that were hired by the government to keep everyone away from it. But yet the coil winders, the Vortex coil winder guys, emerged. And they came mostly out of Marco Rodin's mathematical vortex theories that were definitely inspired by my work to some degree. I know that from talking to Marco myself. But he's got his coil guys, and I've got my designs, and they're very similar. They're amazingly similar, but I don't use the golden angle. I use a different angle. And I started to figure out how the craft works. And I go, and the last presentation I gave at the Bob Brown UFO Congress in Laughlin, Nevada, I had this eco film channel that are filming me, and I was announcing that I was going to reveal blueprints on how to build a UFO, but I was going to leave one or two things out that if you didn't have those, you couldn't steal it from me. And I announced it, and I gave that lecture. It became a huge success on YouTube, and tons of people called me and wrote me and said they were going to fund me. And every time there was an investor ready to give me $100,000, they disappeared. They never ever called me again, and I had no way to get a hold of them. So I knew I was being watched. But then I started advancing my star system transmitters, and I began to have regular contact with Pleiades. And I was guided to calculate all the frequencies in the Great Pyramid. There was something about the pyramid. The pyramid was you have two phases of UFO technology. You have anti-gravity, and you have the interdimensional drive that takes the craft and puts it in another dimension, in another universe. Because the UFOs don't move through our space-time. They don't move through our fabric in space-time, which is why you don't see them way out there and cruising in past all the 9 planets the way NASA wants to see it and then landing. They just pop in. The UFO I saw in Berkeley, 1968, when I was 7 years old, it's just hovering there, no markings. The color of a very well-known metal. I won't say what it is, and it just suddenly it's like a tiny wormhole envelops it, and it just gets sucked out of our dimension. As if you were under the water and you were watching two dolphins swimming towards the surface, and they pop through the surface of the water and you don't see them anymore. That's what it looks like. They go out of the fabric of space. And it looks like there's a vortex form there that causes it, and they jump. And I've been getting lessons, step-by-step lessons on how that actually occurs. Now, I don't have the financial means or the lab to do that myself. And the people who are getting all the money right now for building their own coils and stuff are not people... are other people, and a lot of them don't they know a little bit, and they're getting funding, and they're producing some results, and some of the results are, there's a guy, Russ Greaves on YouTube, in his vortex coil, he puts a magnet, a small ball magnet, and he uses a RPM, revolution per minute sensor, a Hall sensor, and he's getting 500,000 RPMs.
Wow.
On a tiny coil. I mean, this is only at 8-inch coil. I'm like, 500,000 RPMs. Do you realize that Rolls-Royce jet engines to go Mach 2 are like 10 to 30,000 RPM motors that are running the turbojets? So even though it's a tiny magnet going 500,000 RPMs, if you can stabilize 100,000 RPMs, you could have air-jet, vertical lift, hovering air cars. You can have jet engines, if you build them on a large scale, that are electric powered, that are way faster than our afterburner super fuel jets.
Exactly. Wow, I wish you'd get the funding. I tell you what.
No, that's just stage one. But the next stage of this vortex, these vortex magnetic fields, is off the chart. It's off the chart, and it's such deep science. It has to do with using the vortex to open up these mini wormholes. Low mass, not increased mass, low mass mini wormholes. And it has to do with certain materials. I've been studying material science, old books in physics and engineering that are out of print at AT&T and Bell Labs in the early days, and the research they were doing there, they got stopped. And there are certain metals and blends of materials that have these holes in it naturally. And all you got to do is open them up. Now, quartz crystal has the holes. The holes are called semiconductor holes, and we developed a pendant line of biotransformer crystal pendants that we vibrationally imprint harmonic frequencies into. And I figured out how to build a technology to imprint crystal with vibrations.
Nice.
And the first thing we noticed is when people wore these, they would be running to the aura camera booth at the UFO show and getting their aura before and after when they're wearing it. And when they're wearing it, their aura is more balanced and the colors are brighter.
Nice.
And sometimes in some people there are significant increases of light, and other times there are less significant increases in light. But then we used a very advanced aura camera called the GDV, and we saw an amazing improvement in people's bioenergetic field. And of course your bioenergetic field is transmitting faster than light. And so we started selling those, which were fueling and funding my ability to start making better transmitters. And I started making harmonic transmitters and stripping out the inside of flashlight tubing and putting a tourmaline core electromagnet inside with some amazing windings. And I developed frequencies for dozens of star systems, all the 9 planets, to help people get into different states of consciousness.
Nice.
And healing frequencies that many, many people are using with my light stream wands and actually curing very difficult diseases with very quickly.
That's wonderful. What about electromagnetic pollution? Does it shield from that too?
Well, electromagnetic pollution, you can't really shield it. It's getting too strong, and it's so penetrating at the billion hertz waveform, the gigahertz level, that it's going through walls and wood and steel and everything. So I went to the point where we were researching. There are metals that will block it, but those metals are very expensive. Like, you can block a smart meter with, 2 foot by 2 foot sheet of tungsten, about an 1/8 inch thick, but that'll cost you $800. And I don't sell it because it's not worth it for me to buy it and resell it.
Right.
But tungsten is used to carry nuclear fuels that emit gamma waves, and gamma waves are way higher frequency than microwaves, which are what are coming out of cell phones and smart meters. So it's easy for tungsten to block it, but it's freaking unbelievably expensive. But you just have to decide: are you worth it? Are you worth $800 or $1,000 to block your smart meters from? Because you don't want the waves to bounce in the house. You want them to bounce off the tungsten plate, which you mount on the inside of the wall wherever the smart meter is, and then the electromagnetism then bounces out into space where the satellite is.
Right.
But what I found is it's better to reharmonize your field where you're living with one of my transmitters on low power, because I can measure the power coming in on off the Wi-Fi is pretty weak, but because it's microwaves, and even though it's weak, it messes you up.
Mm-hmm.
So the only thing I can do is reharmonize the local field. And believe it or not, there are so many forms of electromagnetic pollution now. You've got over 1,000, satellites, and many of those military, transmitting frequencies all day long, all around the planet, which is devastating to the Earth's astral plane.
Right.
There was an experiment done with the master out-of-body, Robert Monroe, the Monroe Institute, where they put Monroe in a sleeping environment where they surrounded him with a bunch of wire caging, and they put certain frequencies in the caging. And he described when there was no electricity in the cage, he could just out-of-body travel right through the cage. But when they put certain frequencies in it, he couldn't get out, trapped him. And that's what I think the chemtrails are, because the aerosol sample testing in chemtrails in Phoenix, Arizona shows aluminum, silica, barium, and even a tiny amount of beryllium, which is one of the most toxic substances to the human body.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they're doing is they're putting the materials that you need to improve the transmission of frequencies. You know, from crystalline materials to metal materials. So when you bond crystal and metal materials together, you get oscillators. And, for example, if you try to run an electric signal through distilled water, it doesn't transmit very well. But mineralized water, the signal transmits very, very well.
Mm-hmm.
Salt water, it transmits phenomenally well. That's because salt is crystal. So when you have a combination of different, aluminum with silica and other things in the air, in the aerosol trails, it gives their ability to transmit frequencies a better inductivity and conductivity.
Right.
So it means they can mess up the astral plane of the Earth, and I think they're what they're doing with chemtrails on top of spraying flu viruses and other viruses on us, and weather modification, is they're using frequencies, and they might be using some of those frequencies to generate the storms that they're trying to generate, because it's easier to do it in a more conductive atmosphere.
I agree. Yeah.
But so chemtrails are far more sinister than people believe.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that, and so I found that even with my 30, almost 35 years of daily meditation practice, that I could go into high states of realization and awareness and real bliss ecstasy. I mean, I can produce amazing levels of bliss and ecstasy in my body. And I'm teaching a course starting September 1 online for people who are interested. You can just write me for a brochure, David Sereda at Outlook.com. I'm just going to throw that in there.
Nice.
So you can really learn, the full comprehensive way to become free. But they are creating a trap. Now, I didn't really believe. One time I was on the phone with John Lear from, John Lear got involved in the UFO movement, and he's from the Learjet family, and he's a pilot. And he told me that there's a black box on the dark side of the moon, and they're trapping people's souls in it after they die. And I said, and he was highly disturbed over this fact. And he had evidence that it was true, and I said, that's impossible. You can't trap a soul. But what I learned in my spiritual journeys is that, I'll tell you an actual experience I had in Topanga, California. And I've only had 3 encounters with the Greys. And this experience was a dream, a very lucid dream, and it's before the Matrix came out. This is very much like the Matrix. And these very tall, skinny Greys had me strapped to a table. And I had just had my second meeting with Jesus Christ, which was like 10,000 of our suns in brightness. The first one was like 1,000 suns. And unimaginable levels of love and ecstasy and peace and power and beauty and wisdom and grace radiating from Christ. And Christ started teaching me singularity and duality and harmonics. And he started teaching me this. And he eventually leads me to the Great Pyramids, where he grew up in Egypt as a young man, and he's teaching me what the harmonics of the pyramids and how to decode all the frequencies of the Great Pyramid, which I did. And anyway, it's really, really amazing because this experience of being strapped to this table is, I can't get out of the table. They've got me strapped, and they want to erase my memory of everything Jesus taught me. That's what they're trying to do. That's why I brought Jesus in there again. So all of a sudden, I do this backflip out of my astral body, which is very electric. It's a very subtle form of electricity. It's very similar to if I transmit a 1 megahertz signal through my body and I can measure it coming off my hands at a distance with a meter. It has that feel to it. But when I did this backflip out of my body, I went into my light body, and it was so blinding and powerful. The gray ETs went fleeing in terror of me. And that is your light body. That is the resurrected body that you need to attain.
I agree.
Jesus says in the Gospel of Philip that if you don't attain this light body, this resurrected body, when you live, when you die, you will get nothing. Now, I don't really believe that statement because that was translated from a foreign language into English. I forget the Gospel of Philip, if it was a Greek manuscript or if it was Aramaic originally. But nevertheless, it's a very extreme statement. It basically says you're responsible. You have to follow my teachings and attain this light body. And that's what my course is going to focus on, my online, 2-year-long course that I'm going to teach people really how you really do this, not just a few simple exercises. It's a whole comprehensive teaching. And I've done this a number of times. There was a time on the astral plane where I was literally taken. It's just like Star Wars. It's like I'm Luke Skywalker. I'm on this ship, and there's somebody from the inside of a huge stream of planets that are like prison planets, like ours is now, where the rulers have everybody in this prison and this fear consciousness that they have to follow the rules or they will be punished. And somebody on the inside got me in to meet the rulers and the enforcers of this huge planetary system, which was over 1,000 planets. And our spaceship had to stop at all these security checkpoints. And, when you go to bed at night, you just can't imagine that you're going to have this experience. I'm not thinking about this when I go to bed, but it happens. I'm using my wand. I'm doing my frequencies with my meditation through my Lightstream Technologies wands, which you just write David Sereda at Outlook.com, and I'll send you a PDF on that. And I'm going to meet. It's like I'm going to meet these fierce beings, and they believe I have the answer to free this whole civilization. And what I learn before I meet them is that, imagine being a prison guard for a job, but it's 10 times worse than even the prisons here, because after we die, kind of like what John Lear is saying, is some ET has to trap these souls in a black box and keep them in these prisons, and they're not able to activate their light body, so they can't get out. But that's your job, to keep them there. What ended up happening is the gods who did this, who were keeping souls bound because they didn't want them running free in the universe because of their mentality and their consciousness, they created artificial intelligence as real beings to do that job for them, because nobody wanted to do it. Because nobody wants to be the bad guy, because if you're the bad guy, then that's your consciousness. And who wants to do that? They'd rather be enjoying life, but they don't want to deal with these souls. So I came in and saw that there's really nothing wrong with these souls, but they weren't really that bad. So I go through all these security checkpoints in our spaceship docks, and I go into this massive building. It must have 100-foot ceilings. And I go in, and I'm immediately surrounded by about 12 or 13 of the most fierce, they look like dark Jedi masters who know Kung Fu at amazing speed. And I'm standing there, and the guy who brought me in is standing with me. And the moment one of them drew their weapon, which was some kind of a lightsaber type weapon, my aura was so fast, my electric body was so fast, I destroyed all of them. And as I was destroying them, and my weapon was cutting through them like a laser, I said, you guys aren't even real. There's no soul here. I'm not killing souls. You guys are a program. And you programmed all these people to believe that if they tried to escape your prison, that you would hurt them. But you're just a program. You're not even real. So it allowed me to destroy all of them in a matter of 2 or 3 seconds and set them free. And I set them free, and I said, you'll go right back into prison if you believe what they were telling you. Because another being, and another more advanced program that's even faster, I said, these programs were built a long time ago, way long time ago, and the new programs are much faster. The gods must have left these program beings here a long time ago to do this dirty work. And now you're free, but you can go into prison again if you don't activate your light body. The light body is the only body that can be truly free. The astral plane, even if you look into ancient India and the yogis, they all seek true enlightenment or activation of the light body. They don't. The astral plane has a lot of beautiful places and it has a lot of ugly places. And it throws you into the collective mind of everybody.
I agree.
And there are mind traps there. There are weird distortions there. It's not your goal. You don't really want to be there. You want to get into the higher light planes, and that's what Christ was teaching, and the Buddha was teaching, and Krishna was teaching, are means and methods for us to become truly free beings. And my experience and it's kind of ironic because after I met Christ 3 times and the Virgin Mary about 5 times, I met probably a total of 300 to 500 spirit beings and different beings from different planets. And I've met Satan in person, the being Satan, who is very, very bright, extremely bright aura, but there's no love and peace and ecstasy coming from him. He radiates conflict. He's the master of war. And he tries to engage your will to do battle with him. And if he does that, if he sucks you into doing battle, it's kind of like Star Wars. He will destroy you because he is the king of destruction. So I lowered my gaze and I didn't look at him and I said, "You're disgusting." And I realized the power coming from him was so enormous. The force was so enormous in conflict. If I looked at him, he could destroy me. And I said, it's only by the will of Christ that I'm alive. Because without Jesus, I am powerless against this being. And after I met him, I was so disturbed. Why did I have to meet him? And the Virgin Mary appeared. I saw her with my eyes open. I looked at her feet, and she said, "I just wanted you to know he's real. That it's not an imaginary person, figure. This being is real." And in my opinion, this force is winning on the physical level of taking over Earth right now.
Yeah, there's a lot of evil.
It's winning because we're letting it win. We're giving into it. We're believing it, just like when I went to those prison planet systems and I freed all those souls, they believed it. They believed they're the body. They believe they're the astral body. So therefore, if somebody is greater at battle and weaponry than you, they have the power to imprison you and cause you pain. And because you're afraid of pain and imprisonment, it makes you believe that because you're afraid of that, you're nothing greater than that, then you can't be free. But once you attain the light body, you know you're free, and you know that somebody could put nails through your wrists, and it's okay, because you can let that body fall off, and you can live in the light. But that's a hard thing to realize, and that is the number one reason the dark forces are winning here, because we actually believe we're this body. We may say that we don't believe we're this body, but we're not acting it. So therefore, they can do anything they want to us.
Exactly.
They're winning.
Well, they are. And before we're getting ready to wrap this up pretty soon, David, but I want everybody to, once again, if you could mention your websites and how they can get a hold of you also.
Yeah, I mean, if people want to get a hold of me and they're interested in my course or my wands or my pendants, you can go to lightstreamtechnologies.com, or you can write me at David Sereda, Sereda @outlook.com is my public email, and you can see my films at voiceentertainment.net. And I've been doing this meditation work for 35 years every single day, and I'm not somebody who's just learned how to meditate in the last 6 years and am teaching. I really want to teach you how to become free, how to attain true singularity in all aspects of your life, and how to really experience this light body, because this light body is pure ecstasy and love. There's qualities in the light that make love and ecstasy look boring that there are no names for. It is the most wonderful experience for me to meditate at night when my wife and baby are going to sleep, and my wife does this amazing light work at night that fills the room with energy. And the feeling that it gives you is so incredible. It's better than anything. There's nothing this world can offer that compares in even a millionth of what the light body feels like. Just the feeling of it when it's activated and you're in this what the Hindus call the state of samadhi, or the true luminous state. Now there are many levels. There are 7 to 9 levels that humans have attained in recorded history in many different religions in the light body itself. So there are different levels of the light. But just to get the first one removes most of any suffering you could be experiencing here.
I so agree with you on that. Yeah, I want to thank you so much for being on tonight. It's been an honor to have you on. It really has. I hope to have you back. And I didn't get to talk to you about magnetic north, and I don't know if we could maybe mention it for just a few minutes here. But I do want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. What's your take on magnetic north? What's its status?
Well, I've been trying to follow the status, and I did see some evidence of a person who took some measurements that there was a huge leap in drift of magnetic north. But it's hard to tell. You have to get a lot of measurements from different points, because there are, when a magnetic pole shift is in the works, you can get these vortices in the Earth's magnetic field on the sides, which can give you really distorted readings, which are only local to that region. So your compass can be really whacked out in a local region. And if you're getting one of these side vortices forming where you are, you can get amazing weather patterns and weather disasters and things like that near those vortex funnels. But to know for certain, it is certain that if you change the direction of a magnetic field, the physical Earth magnet will move to follow it. It has to. But the Earth only has to move 1 full degree, which is about 70-something miles of movement, to destroy cities with the biggest earthquakes we've ever seen. You do not need a full Earth reversal. You just need 1 sudden degree of movement. It would be unbelievably bad. And I'm worried about that because there's been enough movement in the magnetic field. The scientist who did it, Larry Newitt, is a Canadian who went up to northern Canada and Inuit territories and was measuring the sudden increase of movement that started 10 years ago. And so I've had his email and I've written him, and I'm trying to find out, is there any new studies, that can verify some of these independent people who are saying in their local regions they're seeing another sudden huge movement. And see, that can explain for all the creaking sounds and the sounds people are hearing all over the Earth,
right?
The strange sounds, because the Earth plates start to grind and they produce all kinds of frequencies and sounds. And then the sinkholes you're getting everywhere, that's another sign that the crust is actually moving and tearing. So I'm worried on that level, And maybe because the dark forces are winning here, that something has to happen. Everybody's waiting for divine intervention, but don't do it. don't wait for the second coming of Christ. Don't wait for divine intervention to save you. You have to raise your vibration first.
Mm-hmm.
It can't save you if you're not doing anything. You can't just read a book. You've got to understand the true meaning of word in the Bible is logos. In the original Greek, it's in the beginning was the logos, and the logos was with God, and the logos was God. Logos was translated in Latin to word, the word word, but that's not word. It's not word the way we know word. It's spirit. It's the vibe. Actually, logos is an Egyptian word that means the vibration of the universe and the sun. So it's more about that. And the original Lord's Prayer in Aramaic, Jesus addresses the logos. He says, "O thou from whom the breath of life comes, who fills all realms with sound, light, and vibration." That's logos. He's addressing the logos, the sound and the light.
Mm-hmm.
And the sound and the light is an activation process in deep meditation. So you use harmonic sounds, and it turns out the Great Pyramid has all these levels of harmonic sounds, which I'm about to reveal in my new film on the pyramids I'm trying to do.
Excellent.
And I've decoded all of the frequencies in the pyramid, and I've scaled it to our musical level and played the tones, and they're the most melodic, beautiful ascending tones, far more melodic than our chromatic music scale, and far more melodic than the solfeggio scale. Far more. If I put solfeggio side by side and our scale side by side in the pyramid scale that I've decoded, everyone who hears it goes, "Oh my God, it's far better. It's far more perfect." Well, those tones in the Gospel of the Egyptians, Jesus taught people to enunciate and chant those tones because they activate through the sound, because sound becomes light. Sound causes vibration to stir in materials, crystal and metal, and when the metal starts to vibrate, it starts emitting electromagnetism, which is light. Absolutely. So we have that same process in ourselves. So Jesus addresses, this is the Lord's Prayer in his language, the way he said it, "O thou from whom the breath of life comes, who fills all realms with sound, light, and vibration." So there's breath, there's sound, and there's light. And the meditations that I have designed and I practice, every quarter of the year I do a Breath of God meditation that I have as a download for $10 for people who want it. And you do it for 30 days, and it's a 45-minute long, slow, deep inhale guided to music and my voice. You do that 30 days in a row every quarter. I've been doing it for years. And then you go back to your regular meditation. Oh my God, like every day when I do my breathing, I'm getting higher and higher and higher. I come out of it feeling like a million, happinesses. I mean, you can't even believe what it does for you. Well, that's what he was doing, because that's the Lord's Prayer. Mm-hmm. "O thou from whom the breath of life comes," the breath of life, breathing the spirit. So you've got to learn how to breathe. Mm-hmm. Then you get the inner sound current, the inner sound vibrations happening, and then it activates light. And that's a whole process. I found that using my transmitter with meditation to transmit the pyramid tones and frequencies right into my DNA magnetically was more advanced than sound, because sound waves you can only hear 20 to 20,000 hertz. Mm-hmm. And I can transmit low frequencies of the planets and the stars, which are more equal to human brainwave rhythms, and really assist you in the process of activation.
Oh, it sounds wonderful. I'll have to get that download. That sounds fascinating.
Yeah, you got to try the Breath of God for 30 days in a row. It's not a really aggressive breathing. It's a sips of air into the lungs and exhale.
Nice.
And you're putting your awareness. For the first 15 minutes, you're going through the 7 energy points in the body, and the second 15 minutes, you're breathing into the different parts of the body, and the third 15 minutes, you're breathing into dissolving the body boundaries into infinity.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So three stages. You got to try it. I mean, it's anybody who suffers from depression, you can conquer it by doing these meditations.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in that, and breathing, like you say, is so important with the chi and universal life force, for sure. Well, I want to thank you again, David. What an honor it's been to have you on tonight. You're a brilliant man, and I hope you get the funding that you deserve, because we really need you here.
Yeah, thanks for being here and putting these shows out.
Oh, my pleasure. And it's just, I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. And So anyways, I think we're getting ready to wrap this up real quick, but I did want to thank you once more. And please come back when you're ready to release your documentary, is it you're putting out?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, whenever that gets ready to roll, just let me know and we can talk about that because I'm very interested in observing that and checking that out as well. So.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and thanks for having me.
And thank you, David. You take care. All right, everybody. See you next week. Thanks, Keith.